and the slides. So welcome everyone. And if you would maybe share the screen, Nay, for if you would maybe share the screen for the slides, we can begin. So if you want to go back a couple, Nay, just up to where is the outline of the course, maybe back about 3 slides. Yeah, thanks. So just as a reminder, the outline of the whole course, week 1 was call and character. Today we're going to look at vision, strategy and funding very superficially in the little time that we have, in order to allow time for discussion and as well on an interview that we'll be having in the second part of the morning. Next time we're going to look specifically at launching and hearing some stories of what it meant for some places to launch a new group and the challenges of that. And that's November the 25th. And then, sorry, that date is wrong. In week 4, I'm not sure how that happened. That will be in December, and it'll be a couple of weeks into December. So apologies for that. We will get that for you. It will be on December the 16th. December the 16th. So apologies for not correcting that. Okay, so that's where we're going. And also to remind you that this is essentially taken from a resource that we're putting together. You can see in the next slide. And then the next slide shows you some of the contents of that. That's the Bible studies. It's it's got about 10 different chapters about pioneering. We're fine-tuning it as we go through these courses and hear some of the feedback, but that will be available. The notes from this section will also be available afterwards. And as I said, once this is done, the full resource hopefully will be available for you. So that's and just to remind you that there's a lot there that we can't cover, but hopefully in the notes that you will be able to get it. Okay, so what about today then? This is the outline for today. We'll have our short Bible study, and then we'll be looking at what it means to define our vision and to share it. We'll hopefully make a little bit of a start on the strategy, although that can be so contextualized that it can be difficult. And then after the break, we'll be looking specifically at resourcing the vision, funding, and partnership development. Okay, so last time we looked in the scripture at 5 different parts of the Bible and what motivated pioneers, Paul, Zerubbabel, Caleb, etc. So today I'd like you to look at Nehemiah. You can see the text on the next slide. And I would like you to take some time. We'll pause the recording and you can read Nehemiah 1 and the first 10 verses of Nehemiah 2. So Nehemiah 1 and 2, and then we're going to break into groups maybe in about 4 or 5 minutes after you've had a chance to read it. And I would like you to maybe if you put them into 3 groups, Nay, and you can get the questions. Or I want to know what the problem was that Nehemiah was facing. I want you to find out what is behind your vision for pioneering. Why do you feel this is important? I want group 2 to look at what resources were needed and what risks were involved, and to ask yourself the question, what are our needs and our risks? And group 3 then, how did Nehemiah pray? And what sort of soul work is needed in us and our team if we're to engage in this pioneering ministry? So you can turn your camera off briefly if you're more comfortable that way, mute yourself, take 3, 4, 5 minutes to read the passage. And then if we would go into groups and give folks a chance to discuss that, and that might be coming back maybe 8 minutes or 9 minutes after we go into the groups. That would be great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And I just wanted to get us started in the Word and remind us of some of the pioneers of Scripture. So again, in the time we have, we don't have time for major feedback, but I would like to hear from you. So like we did last time, maybe if there was one thing that struck someone in your group about the Nehemiah story and how it might apply into your context, we will hear something maybe from each group. So is there someone would like to start for us? And who was in group 1?
I can go.
Okay, yeah, please.
So we think, or at least I think, maybe I'm biblically or theologically wrong, is that there was a promise of restoration of New Jerusalem, and Nehemiah saw himself as a part of that promise and contributing to that promise. And Jesus also promises that the gospel will be proclaimed to all nations, to all languages. And in context to serving international students, we are also fulfilling the part of the promise where we share the gospel to the students who are not from our home country, but also coming from different backgrounds, religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, language, from different languages as well.
Is that the ministry that you're involved in, Peter, with international students?
Yep.
Yeah. So we have this issue where something was wrong and was not in tune with God's will, as Nehemiah understood it for his city, the city of God at that time, to be in ruins. And so he grasped the vision, and likewise, there are promises for us with all nations and taking the gospel to all nations. And our pioneering ministry in Peter's case then is important. It's part of fulfilling that commission. And if we see somehow the walls broken down and barriers to that, or people having no vision for that, then it should stir our hearts. Yeah, thanks, Peter. Who was in group 2?
I was.
Yeah, so many.
So what resources were needed and what risks were involved? We noticed that he needed very practical things, like he needed time off, he needed safe travel and passes, like a pass, letters, and he needed timber. And of course, he needed the king's approval because he couldn't get those by himself, and he needed God's protection. And one of the major risks was, of course, the king saying no and traveling. Yeah. So what do we need? We didn't have much time to discuss that, but we all agreed that we needed some very practical things.
Yeah.
And we needed to be dependent on God, because something which is quite striking is that he asked God to give his servant success. He has his own plan. He knows what he needs to do, and he needs to rely on God. But at the same time, he knows what he needs to do. He doesn't wait for God to tell him.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. There were practical and spiritual needs, I guess, and there were things that were outside of his control. He had no control over how the king would respond. And we're probably very aware of the practical needs that we might have for pioneering. We'll discuss those later. But we also need people's hearts to be turned towards it, like the king for Nehemiah, to share, if, or at least not to oppose what we're trying to do. We will see later how Nehemiah initially didn't tell anybody what he was going to do. He went out at night and he looked at the walls when he got to Jerusalem. And it was only when he had that vision that he was starting to share it with others. There was also the risk of opposition when he got there at the very end of verses 9 and 10 or whatever. So there is the risk that even those we are trying to work with may somehow be opposed. So those are very real, I think, for our ministry, aren't they? In terms of feeling under-equipped, feeling under-resourced, feeling that we're out of control as to how other people might respond. And maybe that's why it's important then that we look at the third question, which is Nehemiah's prayer, and where he turns to. So any thoughts on those who were in group 3 with the prayer of Nehemiah?
I can go.
Yes, please.
That we saw in this prayer that Nehemiah was very humble before God, and that he knows that he is only human, and he knows that God is powerful, and he is willing to listen to his prayer. Also that Nehemiah was repenting for his and his family and nation. So, so it's important also for us to be humble before God and to know our place.
Yeah, that's helpful, Sarah, because I think sometimes those who are involved in pioneering, if perhaps we feel we're not naturally gifted in pioneering, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because maybe we feel that the natural gifts for pioneering are those who are, very entrepreneurial, maybe sometimes quite overconfident and able to communicate well. And sometimes that will get in the way of what God is doing, as we saw that the humility that Sarah's talking about, that Nehemiah starts by reminding himself of how great God is and his covenant and the God of heaven, and then he repents of his own part in neglecting God's word, and then asks for God's help in the task ahead. So there is that humility that is vital in any Christian ministry. So if we do have the natural gifts and passion for pioneering, it's always good to be careful that we balance that with this need for humility. If we feel that we're not good enough and that this is not our gifts, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are other things we can look at that you could have that are really good for pioneering ministry. So thank you. Do keep that in mind. There's the rest of Nehemiah, and in the resource there will be a couple of other studies about how things proceeded for Nehemiah in the we might look at those in the later sessions as to how he combated opposition, etc. So let's go back to the slides. And one important thing that we need to do is to define our vision, and just wait till we get back to the right slide, which is
sorry, Monty, I'm a bit lost.
Good. Back. That's way back. So if you can get back to about number 20, number 30 or so, maybe, or
got it.
Yeah, around that. Just yes, there. Yeah, that's just.
Thank you.
Okay. So looking at defining the vision. So obviously it is clearly the what is probably simple. We would love to pioneer a student group in the campus of Rivertown or wherever it is in your country. And the issue of why then comes up. Because there could be wrong reasons of doing it. It might be, people might want to pioneer because they're not happy where they are and they just love to go off and not have to work with the horrible staff they're working with, or the people they're with at the moment, and go off somewhere else. But it's important to establish, some of these. So if you look at the next slide, I've sort of said that at least one of these should be present. Just back a slide there now. At least one of these should be present. What I really mean is that the final one should be definitely present, and then one of the others should be present. So you said it then, that God has laid this place on our heart as we have been praying and dreaming, and we're seeking confirmation. There needs to be some sort of sense that God has led us here. It doesn't have to be through some special word or dream. It can just be, this has been on your heart. I've been thinking about this. I've been praying over this, and the desire has increased, and it has grown in my heart. Now, it may well also be that you've had a request from a student. That's how it sometimes starts. So why is there not a group in my city? Or a request from a church. There are young people going to the local college, and we don't seem to have a group. Can you guys start one? An offer from a graduate who was very involved in the movement, who's moved to that area. A nearby staff worker, so that they have a real heart for the nearby city, maybe the next one nearest to them that doesn't have a group. It may be that there is no other evangelical student group working there, and we have just felt really strongly that it is a major population center. There's a lot of potential. So we then start to look and see, well, are there graduates? Are there other folks nearby? How do we start that movement. Now, in order to keep with the time, because there is a group time before the break as well, we won't break into groups for this next bit, but I would love to hear, and I think it would help all of us round the screen. If we just go back to the off the screen there now, so we can see each other, to find out, what are some of the contexts that you maybe have shared this in your small group, we all haven't had to hear. Maybe I can hear from 2 or 3 people. What are some of the contexts that you guys are working in now that this is very relevant for? Is it a case that you're trying to pioneer something in a new city, or in a new type of ministry, or a new faculty group, or whatever? So would a couple of you like to share? I could pick on a couple that I maybe haven't heard from. Elisabetta in Italy, I know some of your situation. Why is this relevant to you guys at the moment?
Yeah, so basically, like in the northeast of Italy, we have these 3 regions. We are like the next region across, and there's no staff in these 3 regions, so we're the nearest staff. So what often happens is students hear of GBU, and in their town there's nothing, and they're like, oh, we'd like to do a GBU group in our town. So that's what we do. We travel to them, and then we try and understand what the university is like. Well, if there are other churches, try and put them in touch with other Christians. And that's how we start, really. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's mostly students contacting us rather than us doing something, because it's just me and Chris. And we are really looking after the GBU in our town and our region. So at the moment we follow, so that's what we're doing. For instance, tomorrow I'm visiting one such girl. She's about 300 kilometers from where we are. So it's like 3 hours on the train. Wow. I go and spend the day with her and read the Bible with her, and see what we can do, put up some posters. We've got some posters printed.
That's great, Elisabetta. And I think it's good because it means over the next couple of sessions, we can find updates and pray for that work, and pray that you will have a good time with that student, and that you will see others coming too. So it's just good to know that context. Sigita or Victoria, do either of you want to share how this is important in Lithuania?
Victoria, would you like to go?
Okay, so I just started work with students like this month, so like everything is pioneering for me, but also we want to start 2 new student groups in our city, so yeah, that's why it's relevant.
Wow. Okay. And so these are places that don't have a group at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And have you any idea how you might start, or is this all
yes, we have ideas how to start. We have a lot of new contacts, but those people are non-believers, students, like first-year students. So we're gonna contact them and ask them to join a group.
Yeah. Okay. Good. It's great to see some other folks joining us. That's really helpful. If it's possible to turn your camera on, that would be good. And also if you could rename as to what country you're from as well. It's great that we have some folks from outside of Europe. You're really welcome. I don't know, Kalitha, would you like to share a little bit about Sri Lanka for us and how this is important for you? Would you be okay with that?
Yeah. You want to know about the pioneering work in our fellowship?
Yes. Are you doing it, or is the movement doing it? What's happening?
As a movement, we do it, and then especially we have private universities and state universities students. So mainly we work with private state universities in Colombo. Colombo is our capital. Around Colombo or big cities, but now we have moved to other areas also. There are many universities and many private universities more than state university. So now we have many areas we have to move, but still we struggle with all these things, because sometimes we need more staff workers as practical need. Actually with this situation, this pandemic or this COVID situation, we started to work in virtually. Still we are unable to move from province to province. So many students open with us through Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
Earlier we went only for those areas universities where we visit, but now not like that. With this situation, many areas open, and today morning also we discuss how we can work with this harvest or during last 18 years, because one or two students in one university, so we have to give more time, and we have only few staff workers. Actually, whole country we have only 4 staff workers. It is very difficult to all these areas. So we.
Well, it's great that you have the vision, and that's one of the key things. And I think that's one of the barriers that we start with. You have the vision, the movement has the vision, and to pray for the resources and for the staff, and the new ways of doing things, of course, that the pandemic has opened up. So thank you for sharing that. There'll be more chances in a moment. If you want to go back to the slides, Nay, very simply, I just want to go through these. We don't have a lot of time to talk about them, because I want you to really focus on what's going to be most important for you. So next slide would be the issue of vision casting. John Cotter, he's not a Christian writer, but he's written a very important book called Leading Change. It's on a later slide, and it's about how you go about helping people to get a vision for something. And he talks about creating a sense of urgency, and what he refers to as unfreezing the culture. The idea is that sometimes our culture, including like maybe our IFES or national movement culture, can become frozen in a certain way of doing things. And he says that, you know, some freezers, and I've adapted these for how it might work in an IFES movement, would be maybe if the movement, the board, or even the staff would say, our purpose is to maintain the groups we have. Or if they would say, our purpose is to maintain all the staff we have doing what they're doing now. We can't lose any staff, and we must keep doing what we're doing now. Or if our main purpose is not to lose money, it is to break even financially. And all of those are actually culture freezers, because they put limits on the vision, which is not about the vision itself. Because what you're having at the moment and what you're doing at the moment may not be actually as coherent with your vision as it should be. The IFE's vision of making communities of disciples to transform, you know, society, the church, and the world to the glory of Christ. You may be doing stuff at the moment that you don't need to be doing. You may have groups at the moment that have lost their focus. Unfreezing the culture is important. And in the next slide, I talk about some defrosters, some things that will help to defrost that culture. One is persuading the stakeholders, and by stakeholders, I mean those who have a vested interest in the movement. That could be financial supporters, board members, staff workers, even student leaders who maybe are comfortable in their little group. Persuade them that stagnation means death, that if you don't actually have a pioneering vision, if you're not looking for new opportunities to share the gospel in new places, then simply maintaining what you have will naturally lead to death. All groups need new life. So just as though your local group needs new people into it, so your movement needs new groups into it, if there are areas that haven't really been reached yet. And remind them of their pioneering past. Every movement, every student group was pioneered by someone. They wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the pioneering vision of somebody else. And now they get the opportunity to go further with that. So on the next slide, you'll see the book, John Cotter's Leading Change. I found it very helpful. And also something that we offer in IFES Europe, and that is a national movement assessment by my colleague Igor's. His email address is there. And he looks at how movements will naturally die unless they are constantly renewed. And you have different stages there. And once you get to the institutional stage, where we're maintaining everything we have, everything will go down. It needs to be constantly renewed again. So how do you share that vision? How do you share that vision with others? You create a sense of urgency. And then the next slide will say, we look at wooing others into an alliance. I think it is Cotter that speaks that speaks of forming a powerful coalition. I didn't like that language. It was a little bit too militaristic, I think. But in the Strengths Finder tool, which we also use in IFES, there is a particular strength called wooing, W-O-O. I mean, and it stands for winning others over. But it's also a word that in English is used for romance. You know, you woo someone into a romantic relationship. And it's about relationships. It's about persuading, not coercing. But still, there are things that you can do to woo others, to win others over. And the next slide will show you a checklist of that. I was interested, Elisabetta was talking about, just studying the Bible one-to-one with this student. And that is really effective in evangelism. It's also effective in strategy, in vision casting, where you just invest time talking one-to-one with people, maybe student leaders or board members, who you feel maybe aren't quite sure about this, and you just share it over a cup of coffee. You listen to their hopes and fears. Why are they not sure about this? Are they afraid of going outside their comfort zone? Are they afraid of the financial implications? Find out what makes them tick. Why are they involved in student ministry at whatever level they're involved in? Maybe they've joined the board because it was really important to them as a student. And you'll think, well, what affected you as a student was because somebody had a pioneering vision to start a group in that university and to reach out to you. Ask them what their vision is. So say to the student leader, what's your vision for this place? It has to be more than just keeping this group going and as a comfortable place for Christians. There is a university to be won. There is a mission field there. Ask them, every group was pioneered by someone. So what have been the advantages of that in the past? So that they begin to say, hey, we can still do this today. And rather than giving them some big grand plan of 10 points for saving the university, make gentle suggestions. Say to them, well, what if we were to go 3 hours on the train to a different part of Italy? And what if we were just to go to this new university or this new place in Lithuania and hang around and try to meet some students? What if we tried that? And give them time to process, because they're not, if they're reticent, it'll take a while for the vision to get to them. And one of your aim is, I think, to bring together a very informal group of people who will share that vision and get them to gossip it, get them to talk about it in their contexts as well. And the advantages of this, you'll see in the next slide. The advantages of taking a little bit of time is that they will have time to process what you're saying. You will maybe have time to fine tune your vision. You maybe have this great plan, but by listening to them, they have raised some valid issues and you're thinking, yes, I hadn't thought about that. So maybe I need to talk to the church leader in that town, or maybe I need to talk to the guy who tried to pioneer there 8 years ago and find out what he did or what she did and why it didn't work. So you test the vision against reality, and it also gives you time to gather a team. That team could be student leaders, it could be a graduate, it could be somebody from the church, it could be another staff member who's not going to be as close or as closely involved, but is really backing you and praying for you and supporting you in other ways, maybe technologically, helping with some of the events. So people who you feel you can rely on. So if you're going to plant in a different city or in a different place, you could have both a student, a staff worker, a board member, all as if you're like your praying support group while you get on with the work. And then it's a case of communicating it and getting the movement to communicating, what I would call going public. And you would do that, first of all, to students. In the next slide, maybe they have initiated it. Maybe you don't actually have to do it. They have initiated it already, as Elizabeth commented. But that you need to respond. And it might be a case, depending on geographical distance, it might be a case of encouraging, just going through once a month or something, but mentoring them, sitting down and reading the Bible with them, talking to them over Zoom, prioritizing them, and resourcing them. If your national movement has resources, like Corita was saying, you know, they're strong in the capital, are there resources that those groups have used that, hey, this has worked for us, see if it will work in this new place. And your role really is to respond to that student and give them the resources that they need. If you have other staff in your movement, it might be a case of resourcing the right ones and saying, well, who is the best staff? You'll see this in the next slide. Who's the right staff to do this? And also to reassure those who feel already stretched. Some of the staff would say, listen, I really am struggling here. I don't think I could have the capacity to take on anything else. And say, well, listen, okay, we won't ask you to do it, or we won't ask you to do it without, you know, relieving you of some other duties. So listen to them, make sure that they're heard. And one thing, if you're a general secretary or in the leadership or a regional team leader or something, a staff development plan is really important. What we found in the past was that very often, and I understand that maybe somewhere like Lithuania, this is inevitable with few staff, that it is new people who have to do it, and that has to be the case sometimes. But we've also discovered sometimes in movements that have large numbers, that it's still the new people they give pioneering to, when it's the more experienced workers that perhaps should be in the pioneering situations because they have already worked through a lot of this. And what some movements have is a staff development plan that in your first 2 or 3 years, you're doing the regular staff work, but maybe in your final couple of years, or as you get more experienced, then you get to pioneer something, and it gives you fresh impetus. And that staff development plan can cover everything, not just from the pioneering work you're doing, but the study that is involved to keep people fresh, the responsibilities they have in supervising others. So how do you help your staff to grow stage by stage? And the resource will have a sample staff development plan in that. And then with supporters, focus on the graduates that you have in that region, if you have any. If some of the graduates had studied in the capital city, have gone now to work in other towns, to say, listen, would you be willing to help us pioneer a movement in the university there? Or see if graduates in different regions would adopt the pioneer group. And that's what has happened, I think, in Ireland in the past, where strong groups said, listen, we will pray for, we will give to, and we will make connections with people in this town where you're planting a new student group. So there's a lot of material there, and my hope really is that maybe even 1 or 2 of those things that I've been sharing with you will ring a bell and will be important for you. But I'd love to give you a little time to discuss again. And what we'll do is we will have this discussion, and then we will have our break. And I'll leave some of the stuff now, but we'll have the break immediately after this discussion, because we have an interview coming up after that break. There are 3 questions about how you would respond if you were contacted by a student. How do you use the former student leaders and graduates? And have you looked at where the strategic centres might be in your country where there currently is no little or no student witness, and how would you begin investigating this? You may just want to look at 1 or 2 of those questions. You may not get to them all, but I will give you time. I'll give you at least another 10 minutes and then a break, okay? So we will break. We will have 10 minutes now, and then just go into your break. Try to take a break. Don't talk for 20 minutes. You probably need a stretch of legs, but we will come back for the second half, and for the interview at 11:15 CET, 10:15 UK, 12:15, I'm not sure Sri Lanka, but in 20 minutes time. So you have 10 minutes in groups, and then 10 to 15 minutes in groups, and then a 5 to 10 minute break. But we'll and finance. So in a moment, we're going to switch to the issue of funding, etc. And we're delighted that Tom de Crenne is with us. But before that, we may not have time to deal with it this morning, but I wanted now just to put up, when it comes to making a start on strategy, essentially my couple of points are that you look at the research as to where it might be possible to plant. What we have found is that some places are very strong in some of the provincial towns, but they're actually quite weak in the major population centre, the capital. A number of our movements have a very weak group in their capital city, but are strong elsewhere. So how could that be built on? To keep the main thing, don't lose your missional focus, don't lose what makes IFEs. And then this is just a sample chart that some have found helpful, where you put it out, have we had a group there before? If so, when? Are we still in touch with students from then? If so, who? Are there any other student ministries there? Who's working? Have any current students been in touch? Who have they been? Are there any current or likely supportive churches? Any graduates living in the area? And are there staff within traveling distance, and how far is it? So you actually see that in black and white. And you can immediately see, well, yes, there is potential here. This works for this particular town. So the other thing to remember is that some of this happens organically. You can sit down and do a strategy, but very often, sometimes you're responding to what I would call what's bubbling to the surface, and then saying, well, is God leading us in this direction? And to remember too, what I think I said in the first session, that pioneering can have a renewing effect on the existing groups. It can have a renewing effect. People think it will drain resources, but if something is happening and folks are excited and students are coming to faith and new groups are being planted, that actually has an impetus and an inspiration for those groups that are maybe struggling a little bit more. So anyway, we may come back to some of that. Tom. Welcome. Tom is the General Secretary of Ichthus in Belgium and has been for 12 years?
2007. So about, yeah.
14 years, right. So plenty of experience, and particularly has been helpful in helping some of us look at the whole issue of funding, and he'll say a little bit more about one way he's facilitating that with Sigita at the moment. But Tom, I wanted to ask, first of all, most people find fundraising the really difficult and most difficult part of the ministry, whether it's just general staff work or whatever. It's the thing they get round to doing last. Mm-hmm. And maybe it will even be the deciding factor as to whether we should start something or continue in ministry. Why do you think it's so difficult?
What I hear from colleagues, and that was true for me as well, is very often I think it's bad theology, and that's something we needed to tackle. And I might come back to bad theology later, but it's shame very often, thinking it is hard and complex. And some people don't do it because they don't think they are worthy of it. They don't think I deserve to get money, so I don't dare to ask. That would be my couple of reasons why people don't see it as an option. Yeah.
And maybe that has even been communicated to them by some people, and therefore they have been demotivated and discouraged.
Yes. So personality and personal traumas do play into it as well. And I see some of my current colleagues and former colleagues for whom that plays a big part in why they are reluctant to fundraise. Yeah, and the other thing, as I said, bad theology. not being completely aware, it's God's money. So I'm not asking Monty's money. I'm asking God, will you help Monty see that his money is yours as well, and he can probably part with some of it for this ministry. I'm always reminded that, well, that the Israelites didn't give directly to the Levites, but they gave, if you read it well, first to God, and God did give it back to the Levites. It didn't go fishy. It went, of course, it went from one hand to the other, but the theology was, no, you give to God and God redistributes. And the moment I started realizing that, that gives you, on the one hand, it gives you a lot of boldness, and on the other hand, it makes you very, very humble. Because even people that seem to be extremely rich, even then you have to realize this is God's money. So how do I approach this with integrity and with humility and with always the expectancy of a possibility that God will say yes, but also with the expectancy he might still say no, and that's okay. I shouldn't be bitter because this is God's money. So the no is also perhaps a permanent or a relative no, but it's still a no I need to respect. Yeah.
And was there ever for you a moment, what we would maybe call a Eureka moment, when the light went on, something that you grasped, something that you heard, something that happened that really changed how you approached this issue of raising support?
Yeah. So next week on Friday, I'm looking at Sigita. I'm doing a fundraising training for her staff. Everybody's welcome. She's very graciously said it's an open invitation. But I will begin with asking, do tell me, all of your staff workers, why you get up in the morning to work for your particular movements. The moment I realized that fundraising is not so much different than being excited about why you work for IFS and being able to communicate that, that's, I would say, the bulk of fundraising. Being able to do that, but then thinking, how do I do that strategically? How do I follow up on that? How do I build it into my schedule? But actually giving me 2-3 lines why you are excited, why you work for IFS, it's all the info you need. And the rest can be taught.
And I think maybe, again, going back to my earlier question and using how personality or personal experiences or even trauma or whatever feeds into this, I think there's sometimes staff have said to me, they answer that question so enthusiastically, but then they immediately think, well, other people won't be excited about that. They will automatically think, well, yeah, no, but then that's just me.
And then I would say, try it, because I was surprised that actually that worked. And it's after so many years, I think it was stupid of me not to think it would work, because it works in my daily life, because I do this job. And I get people excited to study the Bible, and I get people excited to do evangelism. So that is also part of me being enthusiastic about a particular vision. So why wouldn't it work when I also use that same tactic, if you want, to fundraising? And
was there anything else that surprised you, either yourself or as you've watched other staff workers grasp this? Were there things that sort of either surprised you or made you smile and feel, yeah, they finally got it?
Yes, we had our working apart together on fundraising days. We have been doing so since last year, and we had our first of this term, or was it, Sigita, 2 weeks ago? And one of my staff workers, who is rather reluctant and rather hesitant because she thinks she's not worthy, was there as well. And in the chats, all of a sudden she said, I mailed someone I was going to mail 2 years ago, and within half an hour they said yes. And that made me so proud, because I bit my tongue. I thought, I've been telling you, it's not rocket science. It's a hard work, fundraising, but it's not difficult. It's not a complex thing you do. It's commitments, it's principles, and it's doing it and follow up. But it's not complex.
But there are still challenges, and maybe perhaps time, perhaps a limited number of folks in your network or circle. I mean, what are some of those challenges, and have you found ways of overcoming them? even if somebody is enthusiastic, and even if they want to, if they hit a wall or they're struggling in some way?
Yes. One of the insights was that some introduction. I'm an archaeologist, and in secondary school I did Latin modern languages. I have had 0 hours of economic training or whatever. Numbers baffle me. But it did help me to see that everything we do within IFES, and we might feel some reluctancy towards because it feels programmatic or it feels sterile. Everything we do can be turned into a project, and a project is something which you can count, which has a certain amount of time with a hope for effects. So even when personal fundraising sometimes seems to hit a wall, you can look at everything you do and say, might there be investors who think that way, or might there be foundations who think that way? And then you split up a part of what you're doing and say, this is a project, and you sell it as a project. So it never stops. You can always go back and say, these people might want to hear it this way. It's not losing integrity by reshaping it. It's just tailor-making it to the people you haven't thought of before. Because there will come a point in which your personal network runs dry and you say, now I really have tried everyone I know. But still then there are certain venues you can pursue, but it takes another mindset to look at your work and say, oh yeah, it could be a project. It could be something a foundation finds interesting.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because I think we do that in other areas of life, don't we?
Yeah.
We talk about things differently according to the people we're talking to, because we're making a connection with them.
Yeah.
You know, so if I'm talking about football with my friends in the cafe who know all the players, I'll talk differently than if something really funny has happened and I'm talking to Gwen, who has no interest in football, my wife. I'll still talk about it, but I'll talk about it differently. You make the connection with the person, and that's really helpful, because with churches we can say, do you have students? You know, what happens when they reach 19 or 18 and go off to university? Would you like to invest in their spiritual development? And that's different from, you know, perhaps folks who know you personally and say, you know, listen, you know me, God has called me to this new ministry. So yeah, that's helpful, and seeing them as projects, because our work is so varied, isn't it? In terms of what we do, whether it is Bible study, evangelism, leadership training, mentoring, and there will be people interested in different aspects of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even with churches, there is no one size fits all. Even I tailor make it for even church that I approach, because some churches might be interested in international students. Some churches might be interested in the idea, oh yeah, we are a branch, a missional branch of the church to a people group you can't reach. Yeah. So even I think, and that's why it's so much work. Once again, not complex, but a lot of work, because I hardly ever send out generic emails or generic letters. And if I do, I make sure I do handwrite something specifically to them in blue.
Yes.
Always works, so that people see that you have done the work yourself, so that it's tailor-made. Even a generic mail, sometimes I might approach 10 churches in one region with one single letter, but I always make sure that there is something which is specific to them or specific to me.
Yeah. Again, that's something I learned, that even it's helpful to do a generic one that focuses on the main things, but I've often said it in blue at the bottom. I said, this is the letter I'm sending out. I thought you would be interested in paragraph 2, or how did that meeting go last week, or something personal, you know, so yeah.
Oh yeah, know your people.
Yeah.
And those two things, making it tailor-made and sometimes adding some personal info, that's what some people resent, or what hinders them. They think, oh, but am I being disingenuous here because isn't this manipulative? And I say, no, it's showing care. It can become manipulative, and I have to be very cautious. And I think everybody who deals with money needs to be cautious. If I'm doing fundraising 2 months in a row, I become a very very mean animal. So I caution my heart that I leave enough time, because if I do it for too long in a row, I only see dollar marks.
Yes.
But it's not disingenuous to add, oh, I saw that you got married last week, congratulations.
It's relational, isn't it?
It's relational.
It's relational. And for me,
and
I
all
think,
of our job is relational. And for some reason, we find that problematic when it comes to fundraising. And I think that's all the things above it. It's personal trauma, it's bad theology, it's, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're right. No, it's been good. I think when I started thinking of it as partnership development, as building relationships with people who are in the work with me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not me doing the work and them funding that, you know. And I think a couple of my supporters have said it's really good to be involved in this. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, they've got that, you know, they actually feel that we're doing this together. I can't talk to students, or I can't go to Latvia or whatever, but I'm really glad to help you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a timeline? I mean, folks might say, how long will it take? I know every context is different, but I mean, realistically, if somebody feels like we want to pioneer this new group, we need either I need the funding, or I need a staff person to fund it. Maybe it's an unfair question, but people do ask, how long will it take?
I think it's partially an unfair question, because what are you asking me? Are you asking me to raise a full salary for a single person, or for a project like repioneering a city, which also involves salary, but that's not the entire thing of it. Yeah. So that's very difficult to answer. Yeah. On the other hand, I was raised with the idea that I come from a very hard context. You can't fundraise in Belgium. And I challenged that notion. And then I would say, and as broad strokes, for a personal salary, I would say half a year to a year. If you're committed, if you have everything in place, if you do the hard work.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. And towards the end, I'll say something about different funding models, because we shouldn't get caught up in the idea that we can only do this work if we have one full-time staff worker. There are lots of other options. And the project idea, I think, is really helpful. Any other principles, any other things, Tom, just to conclude, that, and then we'll see if some folks may have questions for you. It would be good to hear those, but either you can put them in the chat or you can speak them out loud. Any other comments, Tom? Any other principles that we haven't dealt with yet?
Yeah, it's become something I keep reminding my staff workers and myself of constantly. It's all in the follow-up. You might have had this most amazing talk over a dinner, or you had the most amazing presentation in a church, or you wrote the most amazing letter. If you don't follow up within 2 weeks, it probably is a lost effort. And a lot of people put all their energy and effort in that initial contact, whatever means they use, and they think, oh, now it will happen. But very often people are forgetful, or you need to make it as easy as possible. So there might be a small detail missing that prevents them from making that monthly. So follow up within 2 weeks' time, and always phrase it. Have you thought about what we've been discussing 2 weeks ago? Or do you have all the information you need? Or can I help you in any way? Or do you want me to remind you in 2 weeks' time once again? But always follow up. Never assume that people have everything they need or know everything they need to start giving, even if your PowerPoint was the most amazing one you ever made.
Yeah, and especially with the digital options and all now, that they have every step-by-step guide. The people are asking, how do you give? This is how you do it. Did I see a question for Tom there? Did I see someone raising their hand a minute ago? Or anybody want to make a comment on that, or ask him a further question?
Maybe I have a question. So how focused do you need to be with your fundraising? Because we have a lot of needs, so we would like to fundraise for our new staff, but we need also to fundraise for the national events. And we need to, and there's like, I'm always scared, like there's too many requests, we ask money for the national training event and we ask money again for the staff. So how many times can you do that? Or yeah, what's the strategy there? I don't know.
People can be over-asked, and I'm always very conscious of it. So we have, especially when you have multiple staff that needs to fundraise within the same pool of people in churches, we have an online Google Doc where we say at the beginning of the year, these are the things I plan to do in terms of fundraising. So I'm going to contact Pastor X by that time for this project. And I have all the financial information, I will add on that document, yes, they have responded and the first payment is coming in. But that's accessible to all of us, so that whenever we do fundraising, we first go to that list and say, oh, no, he or she is being asked already, or it has only been 3 months ago. So if we now ask again, that's just impolite. So I think make sure that all of you know from all of you what you're doing. Because it feels very unprofessional to get 2 letters within the same week from the same organization asking for something completely different. And I don't think it's very pastorally sound. Then strategy, I always begin with the graduates. So my graduates get 3 letters from me within a time span of 1.5 years after they graduate, because that's your most stable. Although I love project fundraising, for me, it's a last resort. If you can get everything funded by people that know you, because a graduate is easy. It takes 1 dinner, and probably they know what you're going to ask, but make sure that you mention it as well. And then by the end of the dinner, you say, so 50 euros a month? Yes, okay. And they don't need any, well, they still need follow-up, but not as much as sometimes with churches, it takes me 3 years of repeated questions and coming before the same committee again. And you do it because you want them involved. But I think now, after 14 years, I would say that 80 to 90% of what we need annually comes from graduates. And that's a stable source, because all the numbers say that people only give for about 7 years. I have people in my database that have been giving substantially for 20 years, 30 years. So, but you need to begin somewhere. But if you have to begin somewhere, make sure your database with your graduates is as up to date as possible.
Thank you.
And I think too, that whole issue of people giving for 15, 20 years, so much of that has been back down to the follow-up and the constant keeping in touch, that they've never felt neglected or taken for granted. No. So
that's number 1 reason why people stop, because they feel it doesn't matter if I give or not, I don't get any regular updates. Never allow people to say, oh, don't spend that stamp on me. Always keep them on your lists. Yeah. That's that money to that stamp is very well spent.
One more question. Anyone would like to follow up any of what Tom has said? Tom, do stay with us in case you can feed in, sure. But I'm also conscious I'd love there to be a final time for reflection in a group on this and prayer for one another in small group. So I'm not going to say too much more about the funding, because Tom has really covered a lot of what I was going to say. Maybe Nay, if you could put up the 1, 2, 3 slides further on with the little star, the one that has the quote with the little star on the corner. And I think it's that one. Yeah. Yes. Again, this is, Tom has already said this, but it was my Eureka moment, that those who are supporting you financially need to be made aware that their gifts are not a charity, but a ministry. They're not giving money. They are investing in people. They're your partners, without whom the ministry would not happen. Pioneering does have some advantages. people get encapsulated and inspired. So in some respects, if you're raising for a pioneering ministry, people possibly can be more inspired by that than by something that's a little bit more maintenance. So don't be discouraged about that. There are also alternative models. I'll just go through the next ones quite quickly now. Not just a full-time, but there's part-time, was what I call bivocational. I did my research on that, so I'm happy to talk at greater length about that to folks. There's also maybe partnering with other organizations. There's pros and cons in all of these, and I deal with them in the resource. But if you would go ahead to 3 slides further on now to the benefits, part-time bivocational do have some benefits. Counterintuitively, the research has shown, certainly among those who were bivocational pastors, tent makers, if you like, working in another job and doing ministry, the research actually showed that burnout was lower, because so many people get burnt out in ministry. And one of the big reasons for that is that it is all consuming. And sometimes in the early days, there is not always the hours to fill with what you feel you should be doing. So senses of guilt and shame will all come into that. And folks feel, you know, people are paying me full time to do this, but it's slow getting started. And that is why, and also they have nothing else to divert themselves with. They probably don't take up as many hobbies or get involved in as many community things because they feel guilty because they're being fully funded. In reality, the most effective have sometimes been those who have got a job, a small part-time job alongside their ministry, because there are missional opportunities. They understand the world. If they're working, you know, alongside other students who are baristas in the cafe, they understand the life of working with that boss and juggling various responsibilities. And it is a better fit for some people who are pioneers, that they can juggle this. So don't write off the possibilities of people maybe earning some of their support from their own work. That can be very helpful. So I leave the stuff on partnerships, I think, because that's a whole new area. Just to be said that one of the tensions, and if you are working with another organization, is that that you know, you've got to be careful that your ethos is not diluted, or that there is that there's not a loss of focus. And it's important that you do you know, think that through carefully. And I've got another section in the resource on that. But if you go to the questions at the end, maybe you might want to finish up by meeting in small groups to pray for one another as to what your needs are at the moment, and maybe reflect on a couple of these questions. What financial models might work in your situation? What are the first 3 or 4 things you would want to do to start support raising for the new work? And again, Sigita has put into the chat the date of it's just for your movement in Lithuania, isn't that right, Sigita?
Yes. So we kindly asked Tom to help us with fundraising training. So he agreed to spend a day, like have a bit more than half a day on Zoom, another Zoom together. So me and my new colleagues from Lithuania be listening and talking and discussing with Tom about fundraising. So if you are free on that day and would like to get some new ideas or input, or just fresh up with your basics, feel free to join. I put my email on the chat, so just write me and I will send you a Zoom link.
And I hope you don't mind me saying, Sigita, I mean, this is also encouraging, because, you know, I remember back a number of years ago that this was such a massive issue in Lithuania, and you couldn't really see any way out of this. And that's why it's been so encouraging to see how some of that has been effective and fruitful for you guys. And also Tom and Sigita together, they've been putting together what they call a working together day for the region. So one of you want to say something about that, in case you know, this would be of help to folks, and in addition to that?
Yes, so basically, as I said, I think it's not rocket science. It's rather easy, and most of you know what you have to do, but what prevents you is I just don't want to. And sometimes what is lacking is a sense of a community that is there to support you, or the sense of accountability. So what we provide is community and accountability. So we have made 3 days online where everybody comes in like this Zoom meeting, and we begin with prayer, very short, and we go around, what will you be doing today? And for instance, I'll be writing a report to this foundation. I'll be writing my thank you cards. I'll be going through my list of, so everybody knows what the other one is doing. And then we go silent for an hour, and everybody works with their screen on the thing you set out to do. After an hour, we break, and that we repeat that 4 times, so 4 slots of an hour. And at the end, we have a small, so was it successful? What happened? And there's always stories of people that say, yeah, I already got 2 or 3 people saying yes. Or it was the email I was planned to send out 2 years ago, and now I finally did. So it's not so much training, but it's giving you accountability and community to do the things you set out to do yourself.
And Chris has mentioned they're already doing that in Romania. Is the next date for that available, Sigita?
Yes, November 9th and
November,
then December 9th.
December 9th and November 9th. That is terrific, because let me tell you, it will always be the thing, if you're like me, it'll always be the thing that will be at the bottom of your to-do list, and you'll postpone it and postpone it. So here's a chance to do it with other people, and that's really helpful. And just one last announcement, which is, I would love, I mean, we're not able to get through a lot of the material here because it's important that we interact and just look at the major issues. If you were saying this, and this is great, but I have a lot of specific questions, I would love to have an hour or two with you to look in greater detail at some of what you've been talking about and to ask questions. Then I am available, and I'd be very happy to Zoom with any of you, or to visit, as I'm doing with some of you, to talk through some of that. So please do get back in touch, and we can have that conversation, and we can ask, well, what particularly do you need help with? Is it vision casting? Is it strategy? Is it personal motivation? Is it funding? Is it launching? Is it actually getting started? Whatever it is, would be great to have that conversation. So do feel free to get in touch with me. I'm just putting my address in there now, and feel free to do that. Guys, we will meet again in a month's time in November, and that's on November the 25th. And we'll look at launching, and we'll be hearing a couple of stories of how people actually got from nothing to something. And I hope that will be useful and helpful for you. So we'll be break into groups with that second lot of questions. Well, maybe just put them in, concentrate on the first 2, and pray for each other, and then simply leave. We will keep the meeting open, with in case some groups go on a little longer than other. We'll keep it open for the next while before we close it. So thank you very much.
Hi, did you get an invite to the group?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much.
Oh no, you're welcome. I was just wondering
brilliant.
if it would be wise for me to join one of them, because
do if you want to.
They're in a community. Don't want to be the.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I've just recreated the rooms, Tom, so it doesn't matter if you wanted to join. It's a new rooms each time.
Okay. I'll pass on this one.
Okay.
Tom, though, would you like us to promote a bit more your fundraising days amongst the staff, because it's so good?
Yeah, sure. And the format doesn't matter if it's 9 or 20. So yeah.
Could you write me just a short paragraph on what you do, what you just said there, and how it's different to a training day?
Yeah.
Just describe what it's like, and then I can put that on the content.
Sure.
And I'll just make an image that looks like one that fits in with our conversations and pioneering pandemic ones.
Okay, I will.
Great. I think I've got the rest of the information. So
Good.
I really appreciate it, and it was important for me because there's a few letters I have to write as well.
It's the 9th of November.
Yeah. Well, that's possible. That's possible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's not. Once again, I'm not saying it's the most spectacular format, but it seems to work. And I'm glad to ask, Nate, because it's so underused. I think at the peak last year we had 15 people showing up, and everybody of us needs to do fundraising. So it could be.
yeah, that's why I want to promote it.
Many more.
Yeah. It's important, and it is. As I was talking, I was thinking there's a thing on my to-do list. I've knocked it back for a couple of weeks now because you got the excuses. I'm too busy, but then if you don't invest in these people, and you won't be busy for much longer.
It's work just as any other part. Yeah.
No,
but I will send you the information, Nate. That's fine.
Yeah, send it to me. If remind me, it's next week, isn't it? So if you want.
No, it's the 9th of November, so it's in 2.5 weeks' time.
Okay, fine. The sooner you can send it, the better, because kids are on holiday now, and then a foyer. So if you send it today, I can probably do it. If not,
I'll do my best. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Thanks. Now you can keep this room open. Can you just keep this room open and then maybe come back in half an hour and close it? And
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll just turn my video off here and
oh, stop recording, stop.